The third industrial revolution.
Now, the Brits developed the first industrial revolution, and this is an example of one of the 7 different types of economic transformation that's taken place in our human social history. The first industrial revolution, the Brits, they created steam power printing. So you didn't have to just manually print every single page by hand every time, which took an awful long time, was very expensive because of all the manual labour, and because of that hardly anyone actually had access to printed materials. But they changed that with steam power printing. So they basically had a printer which ran on steam and could very quickly print pages, and these could be more widely distributed in the population, much quicker and better than hand printed texts, which were far too slow to be able to transition the society into a more efficient system. So steam power printing created lots of print very cheaply, and indeed they were able to create textbooks for public schools. So public schools became much more prevalent because of the textbooks that were created from steam power printing. In addition to that, they developed telegraph lines so that they could more easily communicate with each other using telegraphs, so that they could more easily manage their economic activity. You can imagine the different texts that they could create and textbooks that they could distribute, yes, to the schools, but also in terms of their governance, so they could better manage their economic activity. And the telegraph also helped with communication too. Now this connected with a new mode of energy in the first industrial revolution, which was coal. Coal enabled steam locomotion as well as steam powered printing, as we've mentioned. Steam locomotion driven by coal enabled us to move from rural areas to more urbanized areas, and it integrated a lot more people in to these systems. We used steam locomotion, we built the railways, we moved mostly from rural farmland to urbanized areas. Our built environment, the buildings, the rail lines, transport vehicles, our built environment changed due to rail, because we could move about much more quickly and easily using steam locomotion with coal powering it. It changed our built environment. It changed our infrastructure. It also changed our temporal spatial relationship. That means our perception of time and space changed. Previously we were just living in farmland and farming areas, but when we could move from A to B hundreds of miles in just maybe a few hours with steam locomotion, it changed our relationship to time and space, because we could get to other places more quickly. So space and time changed in our minds. Our temporal time, spatial space relationship changed. So our relationship with the earth changed with steam locomotion. We knew that we could get places fast, relatively cheaply, and so we weren't just confined to walking distance or to horse-drawn carriage distance. We could go right to the other side of the country in hours, relatively cheaply. It changed our temporal spatial relationship. We went from rural areas that developed their own goods and services locally to national markets. So instead of just people in a local area producing and distributing what they needed locally, and it was sort of insular, it was sort of localized production. That changed with steam locomotion because goods and services could be transported all over the place very quickly and easily now. And so that changed our relationship with production distribution from local production to national markets. In this period, the first industrial revolution, we created the monetary market system. It didn't really exist prior to that. So what we had before was more of a merchant system where there were merchants that would transport goods and services through ships from country to country. It was very slow, it was expensive, and the only people that could afford these things were kings and queens. But we moved out of that model, kings and queens, monarchy, merchants, to national markets, where these local areas can produce their goods and services, but then sell them around their region and around their country through the logistics of railways, so that they could use this new system called a market system, monetary market system. And this gave rise to the nation state. This also led to the second industrial revolution, which is the second fundamental change to our economic system that we've looked at so far. The second industrial revolution provided us with the telephone. Hello? He gave us the telephone. Now you might think, telephone, it's not really that important. Back then it was huge. It was absolutely massive. It absolutely blew everything away, the telephone. You could talk to someone hundreds of miles away for very little cost, immediately, just like that. And you could start to manage your economic activity much more quickly and easily, much more efficiently. Do you ever hear the word phony being used? Oh, you're just a phony. You're a fake. You're a phony. That came from when the telephone was first made. People couldn't believe that it actually worked. People couldn't believe that you could talk to someone hundreds of miles away. So that they would say, oh no, those people, they're just phonies. That doesn't actually that doesn't work. It's not real. They're just a phony. So that's where that comes from. So the telephone was huge. We could manage our economic activity much more easily and quickly and cheaply using the telephone. And people started to be able to talk across continents in real time. And in addition to the telephone, we had television and radio for the marketing of goods and services, as well as learning and entertainment. We also had, during the second industrial revolution, cheap oil, and then Ford in America put everyone on wheels using the internal combustion engine. That gave us even more agile and quicker and cheaper mobility and logistics, so we could get around even more easily. Before, steam locomotion could get you from A to B, but probably couldn't get you very far anywhere around the region because it was a very straight line. You go from A to B. But with internal combustion engine, you can drive literally anywhere. You can drive anywhere where there's a road. So it meant that our mobility and logistics started to get even better, more efficient. Gave us a lot more freedom as well. So we went from railroads to cars, and we also developed shopping malls so people could more easily buy goods and services through this monetary market system. We also developed travel and tourism through the 20th century. However, this model, the second industrial revolution as a model, it peaked in July 2008 with the global recession. The reason for that is because oil hit $147 per barrel. And this was largely caused by Middle East tension, soaring demand from China. They needed a hell of a lot of oil as they're going through a lot of economic growth. Also, the fall in the value of the US dollar meant that oil went very high in cost, because oil is tied to the US dollar. Essentially, it means that oil is generally bought and sold using US dollars as the currency. In addition to that, there were declining petrol reserves. We also were looking at peak oil, which means that there might not be as much oil to get out of the ground as what there was previously, as well as a lot of financial speculation at that time, which meant that people were basically buying and selling oil and speculating on how much there was. And this led in part to the increase in oil in terms of the costs, which led to the recession in July 2008. The cost of peak oil led to the collapse of the subprime mortgage weeks later. And this was the earthquake of the industrial era, of the fossil fuel civilization. It was really the start of the collapse of the fossil fuel industry. And due to this collapse of the real economy of resources, it led to the failure of the fictional economy, which is finances. Because everything is made of fossil fuels, when that went too high for people to buy, the financial system collapsed. When oil is scarce, all other prices go up because it's all tied to oil. So we are now in a convulsive end game of the fossil fuel civilization and the industrial infrastructure which it is built of. And the recession in 2008 was the first earthquake for that. So fossil fuels are dying. And in addition to that, oil states are often failed states because everyone wants their oil. So they have a lot of problems. So where do we go from here?
The third industrial revolution.